Ethiopia also decreases its reliance on raw commodities, and it manages to avoid tariff escalation, as a lot of countries would prefer to see Ethiopia be stuck as the supplier of raw commodities. So it's a great future prospect for the Ethiopian economy. And in 2017, as I've mentioned, Ethiopia has devaluated its national currency, the birr, which is suggestive of a floating exchange market, by 15% in order to increase exports and increase foreign currency reserves. So the government also looks to privatize some leading state-owned enterprises as a part of its new market-based reforms, along with generally liberalizing the economy for trade. So it's becoming a lot more open, and that's an understatement for foreign investment. And this has its consequences, which I will mention later. However, it is indicative of Ethiopia's main goal, which is to transform into a middle income country by 2025 and loses status as an LDC. And the government envisions an annual 11% economic growth, improved trade balance, and higher foreign exchange reserve. Now, it is important to emphasize at this stage that this annual 11% economic growth rate is heavily endangered amidst this pandemic. Um, and so basically, coronavirus, COVID-19, has thrown this government's plan and forecast down the poop chute, making it making it heavily unrealistic in today's scenario. So moving on to foreign direct investment. So um, Ethiopia has attracted roughly $8 billion of FDI, and its main multinational corporations are from China, which are heavily involved in infrastructure and textiles, as I've mentioned. Uh, China are heavy investors, and they bring a lot of new technology. There's a great sense of technological transfer occurring in Ethiopia, which modernizes Ethiopia's production possibilities, and once again shifts the production possibilities frontier, and this generally can be seen as a good sign for the economy. And then we have Turkey for manufacturing, Saudi Arabia and India in agriculture, and the EU is mainly interested in horticulture. So investment incentive, how Ethiopia tracks FDI is they offer incentive from tariff and duty-free benefits. So basically, they say if you produce in Ethiopia, if you open, whether it's in greenfield investment or whether you're using an existing space, you are free of taxes. And another reason why investors would be alert is because of factors. It's because of the cheapness of factors of production like land, labor, and energy especially because a lot of it's state subsidized. So companies use state subsidized electricity, and all these factors are lower in cost. They can compare to African and to other African countries. So Ethiopia is ranked 159th in the world based on business regulations restrictions, which is not that good, but they are improving. But there's still a lot of bureaucratic hassle to leap through, and generally there's still present political tensions due to ethnic cleavages in the Ethiopian society, but the prime minister has been careful and smart enough to provide insurance of protecting the investments these foreign investors make by basically collude by signing and supporting and becoming a member of a lot of agreements like the African Trade Organization and many other legal frameworks that basically give good insurance to these investors. And one of his even more important reforms is the impending privatization of the state-owned railway, maritime, air transport, logistics, electricity, and telecommunications sectors, and this is expected to boost private investment. And here we see a chart of Ethiopian GDP and its growth. And here we see Chinese FDI into Ethiopia. And they follow very similar trends. So, once again, this is just an analogy of how Ethiopia's economic success has been largely due to its foreign investment, large to the foreign investment in Ethiopia. However, it is it's a blessing as well as a curse. If we look at from a more black and white, so the positives of FDI is there's improved infrastructure, which such as railway networks, roads, cargo routes, and other logistical pathways. So basically, the government is made to ensure investors and attract FDI. It invests in even in this infrastructure, as well as it invests in protection of these infrastructures, so it creates better security down those routes, and this security also helps the neighboring populations, um, and thus also aiding development. So also innovation and technological transfer that we mentioned, and of course job opportunities for Ethiopians. So a low cost, cheap form of labor for the MNCs. However, the negative sides. This is based on a documentary that I've watched. Many rural communities, which is about 80%, as we mentioned, are stripped of land to make leeway for these FDI projects. So Ethiopia already has poor private property rights legislation, so the government is free to own and move people as they want. And we know that Ethiopia is largely an agrarian society. Um, and with this arrival of Saudi Arabian and Indian agriculture firms, a lot of land is taken away from these rural farmers who before were reliant as a source of income. They were reliant on their fields to produce crops and trade, barter for goods. However, what the government has done in order to create more land for these investors, they reallocated these rural farmers into government issued villages in a process called villagization, where these populations are left to rely on food aid and public basic service, which is basically the government's social aid program to survive on. Um, and this is quite paradoxical because the government has to request the Ethiopian government has to request foreign aid to feed its own population. Meanwhile, it exports food to other countries. So it has been a form of criticism in the international arena, and also negative consequences of these FDIs. And also another consequence is environmental degradation. So national parklands are being sold to investors like land and territory, and that puts in danger the biodiversity of Ethiopia, as well as certain indigenous communities that are also being moved